Well, Colonel, you know, you and I both work with helping these young guys that are coming back. We're both volunteers with a great organization. We work at the VA hospital in Camp Pendleton. We do our debriefings. It just so happens that you and I were both in Vietnam at the same time, during the worst time of the war. 1968, 500 guys a week were dying. Now, you were a platoon leader, and I was a reconnaissance scout, so I know that you saw a lot of action at Quai Son, and doing the work I did, I was wounded and saw a lot of action. So just having to go through that was pretty tough. I know for you and for myself. I know that it was not easy. And the worst thing was having to come home with all those memories.
Oh yeah, definitely. I know I went into it with a hunger. I was looking for combat. I had practiced in the peacetime Marine Corps, you know, and we practiced over and over again. We wanted to put it to use, and I used to say what the country needs is a war to square it away, you know. And when Vietnam started, I got all excited and said, I got to get there before it's all over with. You know, that's an idiotic, suicidal attitude. But that's the way I was. And I imagine coming out of training, basic training, you probably felt a little bit of that in your heart too. You wanted
Absolutely.
to put it to use, you know?
Absolutely.
You were trained that way, mentally and physically. You were ready for it. But oh my God, what a mess it turned out to be, really. I don't think we can ever put all of combat, the effects of it into words, you know? It's tremendous, it really is. So many things can go wrong. I talk about Murphy. The Murphy was there, you know, the Murphy principle. Everything went wrong. And I was just startled by it all, really. And the only thing that really spurred me on was the will of our young fighters.
Right.
You know? No matter what they were put through, they hung tight. They were good. They were tough. They never quit. You know, that's what I saw. But so many of them died. And then later on, you know, when we pulled out, you had to scratch your head and say, what was it for? What was it for?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, coming home after having to go through all of that, you know, watching your buddies and of course the enemy, having to eliminate them. I mean, that's what we did. That's what we were trained for. Mm-hmm. We did our job, did the best we could. And all of these feelings of, you know, guilt, feelings of that anxiety, that anxious feeling of, you know, you felt like you needed to be in battle again.
Oh yeah.
You probably wanted to go back just the way I did.
Absolutely. When I was in Vietnam, I dreamt about the day that I could come back to the peaceful United States, you know, where there was no threat and there was comfort and all the things that you were raised in, you know. And then I came back and I was climbing the walls. I was wanting to come back into combat. Nobody understood us back here. They called us baby killers. You know, my wife was the only one that was, you know, close to me that really believed in me. And I couldn't explain it to her, but I had the adrenaline rush.
It's awful.
Climbing the walls, wanting to go back. Nothing could satisfy it. And it was a nightmare. It really was.
There was nowhere to go and no way to relax.
Yeah. So you started looking for something. Drugs, alcohol. I found compulsive gambling. You know, I found my action at the poker table.
Right.
And it was bad. I mean, everything went downhill. Really.
Some way to self-medicate, some way to take your mind away from all of the symptoms of PTSD, of combat stress.
Yeah.
Whatever it took, you tried to find that.
And then I thought maybe I could find relief by calling and communicating with the guys that survived, that were in my unit.
Mm-hmm.
So I called them, and they were in just as much distress, if not more. They were
Right.
losing their wives, they were into drinking, they were falling apart.
Yeah.
And that just added all the more misery to me, because I expected, you know, the camaraderie of everybody coming together and being happy again, you know. But we didn't have our M16s and we couldn't shoot at anybody, so we couldn't find a solution. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to say it was funny, but it's interesting that I had guys that were in my recon teams that were here in San Diego, and I did not want to talk to them. It's like I didn't want to bring those memories back. I didn't want to know. I knew that if they were in any kind of distress the way I was, I just didn't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
Because it just would make me feel even worse than I already did.
You know, one of the things in our training before we went over was they taught us to kill.
Right.
And to be ruthless. And no matter how ugly it got, to do our job and hang in there and everything would be all right. They taught us to ignore the ugly things. The guy next to you that gets blown away, the needless killing of innocent people, you know, all of that stuff. And you try that and you do it, but you never really tuck it away. All of those things that you saw are recorded in your brain housing group, you know, and you come back and then they come out and it looks like you're looking through the stuff through a microscope, you know, and the details are phenomenal. I mean, the smells, I could smell it. I could see the action in detail. I could see it in slow motion. And it just driving me crazy, and there was nothing I could do about it, you know?
Right.
And at night, well, when this thing hit me, at night, there was no sleeping at all. And my wife was saying, what's wrong, you know? And I didn't want to dump on her with this, and I couldn't even explain it to myself, let alone her.
Right.
So it really became ugly.
Right. And you certainly couldn't explain it to anyone else.
No.
So you kind of begin to feel so different and kind of begin to isolate yourself just so you don't have to explain yourself.
Yeah.
I'm this guy, and it's because I went to war, and I have no idea how to tell you what that was all about because you weren't there.
Yeah.
So now we come back with all these symptoms, and we got a warrior's heart, which is a great thing. I think it's a great thing. But how do we handle it? How do we treat it?
And, you know, as we've talked to the young Marines over here at Camp Helen, the shooters, the grunts.
Sure.
It's the same thing all over again.
Same thing.
It might be a different war. They might have different technology and weapons and everything else. But the attitudes that they have were the same as we had. They're tight with their combat unit, you know. And I think I asked them once, some of these guys had been over 3 or 4 times. If there was an emergency and they needed you right now, how many of you would raise your hands and volunteer and go? And every one of them.
Every single one of them.
Every one of them. And they're hitting the same thing we hit, maybe even more so.
I'm thinking that same thing. They got each other's back, and they're the only ones that have each other's back.
That's right.
And
that back is what keeps them on even keel.
Right.
Now what happens one day when they have to take off that uniform and go into the civilian populace like we did, it's going to be just as bad.
It's another horrible trauma that you have to face that becomes so difficult. That's where that sleep deprivation comes in, and then you start doing all these crazy things, self-medicating and trying to forget.
And you have the pride.
The pride.
Of trying to self-heal. That's what you've always been taught.
Yeah.
They said to begin with, if you're sick or you're wounded, you go to sick bay, you get medical help. But if you've got a problem up here, you suck it up. You take care of it yourself. We don't want to hear about that. You know? Right. That's what a tough fighting soldier or Marine is all about. And so they've been drilled in this, you know, that type of discipline. And it's part of them. And so the solution is not clear. It's not clear at all. Because, you know, who do they go to? I mean, if they're lucky to go to VA. And what is VA going to do? Put them on meds to mask it. Or put them in some kind of a class that brings it all up again that doesn't have any long-range solution at all, you know?